If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet. As you can see, I'm wearing Air Force Blue, or what I think is Air Force Blue anyway. That means we've got somebody from the Air Force once again. And all of you from the Air Force, you're welcome here. Come and talk to us. Today we have somebody special, very technical, very engineering. So I'm out of my depth here. You will have to talk a lot. And I'm sure some of you are saying, thank God. Be that as it may, we have Laurus Basson, former Lieutenant Colonel of the South African Air Force, technical guy, understand test flight engineer, and all sorts of terminology, which I'm sure he will explain to us. From Rhodesia, where else? The country produces so many great people. Laurus, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. We're really grateful for you. Shall we start by you just telling us basically in 5 minutes your Air Force career, and then we will switch over to your youth, where you grew up, and how did you get into the SAAF, or SAAF as you people call it?
Morning, Chris. Firstly, I just want to thank you and Rebecca for what you're doing with this series. Is incredible. You mentioned it also. You can read history in books, but yeah, you are facilitating the personal account of history by the people and the details. So this is invaluable. Thank you for the invitation that you for me to come and speak here about the topics I'm going to discuss. I just want to give a warning out. All the men and women you've had thus far have been in the forefront of the action. My stuff that I'm going to talk about might be a bit boring, so warning. In fact, it might be a bit nerdy, but I hope at least the people would get a glimpse into what happened in the world of technology / engineering in the Air Force. So to answer your question, I joined the Air Force in 1984 and then initially worked as a mechanical engineer at the mechanical engineering office at ALC, Air Logistics Command. And then I went and did the graduate flight test course at the National Test Pilot School in Mojave, California. Well, they based there. And then I worked at TFDC, the Test Flight and Development Center, or as they say, Afrikaans is TFOS, Toetsvlieg en Ontwikkelingscentrum. And I was there for 10 years. And then in my final years, I was appointed as system and flight test engineer at on Project Flange, which was the project to replace the Alouette helicopter. I initially started studying at the Technikon, also mechanical engineering. And then later I went to Stellenbosch University and did my bachelor's and master's degree. As I always tell people, I'm a thoroughbred mechanical engineer. I still believe problems started the day we discovered electricity. So steam, go steam. Then to answer your question from where I come from, I was born in Rhodesia in a town called Rusape. Now you spell Rusape R-U-S-A-P-E. And we had a teacher at school, he pronounced it Afrikaans way, Rus Ape. So in English, rest apes. In any case, Rusape was between Salisbury, which is now Harare, the capital city, and Umtali, which is now called Mutare. Now, Mutare was in the southeastern direction of Salisbury, and it was on the border with Mozambique. And during the war, it was attacked a few times, or like we used to say in Rhodesia, stonked or reft. My parents owned a farm about 30 kilometers northeast of a little town called Headlands. Headlands was the next town from Rusape in direction of Salisbury. Now, Headlands was a very small town. In Afrikaans, there's a song of a typical small town, die kerk en die bar is langs mekaar, the church and the bars next to each other. Headlands was so small that the church and the bar were not even next to each other. The church was next to the police station. Or like somebody said, the town is so small, if you swerve out for a chicken in the road, you miss the town, and if you hit the chicken, the whole town was under feathers. But in any case, our Headlands was a beautiful town. It was our hometown, like in Afrikaans, my heimat, that. Now, both my parents hail from the Western Cape, My father came to Rhodesia at the age of 23 on the recommendation of his uncle Umkaro, who was already farming there. My father initially worked for a farmer in the Inyanzura district, which is the next town from Resap in the direction of Umtali. He was Martinus Martin, and he was he was an ancestor of the Martin track in the pioneering days of Rhodesia. Then he went to work for another farmer after that in the Mayor Ranch area, which was further northeast from where from Headlands than our farm. Now, of course, my father was a very good sportsman. He had Western Province Junior Athletics colours, and he played for Rhodesia Rugby. So people that would know about rugby, Rhodesia played in the Currie Cup up to 1997. And my father, amongst others, played against the 1955 touring British and Irish Lions. He's got the jersey he wore that day, my brother still got in his frame that's hanging in his house. And for the rugby connoisseurs, his number, he played 8th man, but his number was number 15. Because apparently in those days, fullback was number 1, and as compared to 15 today. So in the late 50s, my father decided to go on his own, and he rented a farm called Lonelydale. Lonelydale was just 2 farms away from the one he eventually owned. And on the neighboring farm to Lonelydale was a copper mine called the Nyati Copper Mine. And as I will discuss later, that played a very strategic role in our lives. Of course, in Rhodesia, the farm workers used to give the farmers a nickname. So the staple food there is sadza, which is a very stiff millipap. It's very stiff millipap, maize porridge. And used to take it in a little bundle like that in the hand and dip it in the gravy. Very nice, delicious. Now, so obviously the farmers gave the workers food, and one of the main ingredients was mealie meal or maize meal. And apparently my father gave the most mealie meal to his farm workers, so his nickname was Kampupu. Now, Kampupu means mealie meal in Shona. He leased the farm from a widower, but I first need to mention that at that time on the farms you had what they call plaaslyne, partylyne, or English party line. So there were maybe 4 or 5 farmers on the same line. Each one had their own ringtones. Ours was, for example, 5 short ones. Other tones were like some men's beard, 3/4 and 1 lange, 3 short ones and 1 long one. And so if somebody was speaking on the phone, if 2 people were speaking on the phone, somebody else could lift up the phone and listen in. Now, according to legend, and I say according to legend, that this Mama Mahuku, this widow that he leased the farm, her nickname was Mama Mahuku. Now, according to legend, the reason how she got it was she was renowned for listening in on the phone when people were talking. But she had chickens roaming the yard, and so when she lifted up to listen in, the people on the line could hear the chickens in the background, which gave her away. Thus, she got the name Mama Mahuku. Now, huku means chicken in Shona, so this is how she got the name. But again, I say it's according to legend. And then in the mid 60s, my father bought the farm. It was just 2 farms away, Nyamangura. Nyama means meat and gura grow. So we are 3 children. I've got an older sister, myself, and then me, the middle child, tough life, and then my younger brother. We went to school in Salisbury, now Harare, and our school's name was Botashof. Now, Botashof, the badge was a ox wagon in the middle with an open Bible on top, and the motto was Dienst, translated into English, service, of course. It was a Dutch Reformed school church which started off as an orphanage in Daisyfield. Now, Daisyfield was near Gwello in the southwestern direction from Salisbury towards Bulawayo. And then they decided to buy a farm on the outskirts of Salisbury, and Botashof was established there. Now, we were the only school we were not a big school. I and the primary and secondary school were about 400 children. We we were the only school in Rhodesia, as far as I know, that followed the South African syllabus. So in high school, it was standard 6 to standard 10 or Matric, while in the other schools followed the British syllabus, which was, I think, Form 1, 2, 3, then O, M, and A levels. But although we were predominantly Afrikaans, we did have other English-speaking people, Portuguese, Italian, Greek people. And interesting enough, we had quite a few people, Afrikaans and other languages from Zambia, where the children came to our school. So now, although, as I said, we are Afrikaans-speaking people, all our languages, all our lessons were in English because that was the official language of Rhodesia. So, you know, typical scenario, the teachers would come into the class and speak general stuff, or like we used to say in the Air Force, waka waka, you know, in Afrikaans. And then, switch over to English. Now, interesting thing, on one of the episodes, or one or two of the Fighting Men of Rhodesia, there's a guest, his name is Mike Norton. He was in the police and a special branch, and he spoke about Operation Enterprise. And our Operation Enterprise was about the security forces got information that the terrorists wanted to attack Salisbury, like the houses inside Salisbury, and the operation was launched to eliminate this threat. And then I found a piece, that he wrote up on the internet, and there he mentions that one night they got intelligence that there was going to be an attack on 3 targets. One of them was the school, Wittershof. The other one was, if I remember correctly, the General Walls, which is the equivalent of the Chief of Defence Force in Rhodesia. And then I can't remember the other target. That was in 1997. Thankfully, it did not happen, because we were on the outskirts of Salisbury, so more vulnerable than more in the city. Of course, when the war started in Rhodesia, our lives changed. We had to adapt to the war situation, and even more so when Portugal handed the power over to Frelimo in Mozambique, because now the whole eastern border was open to a hostile government. It was, I think, more than 1,000 kilometers. And then, my father was in the police reserve, something similar to the commandos in South Africa. Each farmer was issued with a FN, like the R1 in South Africa. We had an AgriAlert, which was a radio system. So if you were under attack or an incident, you call the control room at the police station in Headlands, and they would send out the necessary reaction. We had sandbags in front of the window. We had a security fence around the house, which it was 8 foot with barbed wire. And when we were home from boarding school, it was my task every night to go and lock the gates and walk around the fence to see that it's not been cut. And, the buildings inside the perimeter, see there's nobody hiding there. Not a very exciting job. I didn't like it. It was boring. In any case, we had, for example, our walls on the outside were whitewashed in the house. My father made it painted like a cement color, so that if you walk in the dark, you're not that visible against the back as compared to the back, the white background. We had floodlights around the house, and as an example, we had a cord about 1 meter long with an electrical plug on one side and a switch. So if you're under attack, you just plug it into any socket in the wall, press the switch, it kicks the lights in the house out, and the floodlights go on. So if the dogs bark, and we had one dog. Interesting enough, the smallest one, when that dog barked, you paid attention. The others were just following. They just do the biting work. The other guy does the instigation, So if the dogs bark, for example, you would go into the room where the window where the dog is barking, close the door, switch off the lights, and then slowly open the curtains. You won't just open the curtains, because otherwise you're in the light, the target. So small things like that, it change our lives. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Nyati mine was very strategic to us because firstly, the people working on the mine were in the police reserve. So if there was an incident and we called the police station, they would be the first to respond. And we were very close, about a 20-25 minutes drive to our farm. So, we were at a quick reaction. One of our biggest fears were landmines because it was dirt gravel roads. But there was a big truck, a massive truck that transported the copper from Nyati mine to Headlands station, from where it was railed to wherever they process it. And this truck passed by multiple times in a day. So this was like a protection mechanism to us against the landmines. And then they also had fuel there for the chopper. If there was an operation in that area, they could be fuel there. It also had a supermarket and a butchery. Nice biltong and boerewors. So, but in any case, so then the incidents in our area started increasing. About 3 or 4 farms away from us, a farmer, Uncle Dennis Bagnall, he was ambushed on his farm and killed. Now, his neighbor was a Simpi van Black, and I'll get back to him later. And then our neighbor directly to the south of us was a Hannes Martens. Now, him and his wife and his children lived in Rusapi because of the dangerous situation. So he would, farm in the week, go home weekends, and upon his return one weekend, they waited for him, the terrorists, and they abducted him to Mozambique. So that really shook the community, But I mean, even Uncle Dennis Bagnall's killed, but the things. This was, it hit straight at heart because you realized, apart from being killed, you can be abducted also. So in any case, Simpi and his son Espia farmed together, and then Espia was called up by the army to take spoor to try and intercept Hannes. And while he was on spoor, Simpi and his daughter-in-law, in other words, Espia's wife, Gerda, their small little daughter, their young daughter, and then she was also pregnant with their second child. They went to Inyati mine to the butchery, and supermarket. And on the way back, they detonated the landmine, and all 4 were killed at once. So that was very, very devastating to the community. Then on our neighbors to the north was Dainkie and Taniina van der Spy. Incidentally, he played rugby with my father for Rhodesia. And he also played for the junior Springboks. It's now they call it, I think, the Springbok A, like the B team Springbok. So because he had 2 farms, and then the next farm was Weltevrede, and that belonged to Ben and Tannie Annie van Meerlen. So on the 11th of January 1979, they took their son Willa to Headlands to drop him off there because he got a lift back to South Africa. He was studying there. Now, about a month earlier, he arrived for the Christmas holiday, and that night he arrived, they attacked their farmhouse. So Ben and Tannie Annie dropped them off. They went and did their business. They headed out to the farm. And at that time, Ben was leasing the neighboring farm who belonged to Saki and Tannie Anna van der Merwe. And a while earlier, a few months, I think it was, they came back from a weekend home, and on the way, the 2 of them and their 2 children detonated a landmine. Well, they were injured, but they survived because they had a landmine-protected Land Rover. So they vacated the farm, so Ben was leasing the farm. So when they came back from Ben and Tannie Annie now, he went to the farm, to the neighboring farm to pick up laborers because the workers, they had people working on the farm. We were at home, and it was, say, 4 o'clock the afternoon. And neighbors to the east, Uncle Stan and Auntie Babs Baker, and their son Anthony, who was in the army doing national service. We heard Tannie Annie calling on the radio saying that Ben had gone to the fields to pick up the laborers, and she heard shots coming from there. So Uncle Stan and Anthony jumped in the car and rushed to Tannie Annie to be with her. A while later, the police reservists from the mine passed by in there. They had a Leopard. It was a landmine protected vehicle. I will give you a photo. And they came past. My mother still called her, after she spoke on the radio, and to support her on the phone. And she said she knows he's not coming back. So as it turned out, he was ambushed. So the next morning, my father, Uncle Stan, and Anthony, we went to fetch the bakkie at the ambush site. Now, it was raining season, and the road is this 2-spoor plaspaadjies, the 2 tracks. It was raining season, so it was nice and green. The grass was knee-high. And what had happened was the road had a turn to the left and then a little bit straight. And next to the road was an anthill. And this anthill was not even like half a meter from the side where the bakkie would pass. And it came to stop just past the anthill. We picked up empty doppies, cartridges, AK behind the anthill. The anthill was about a meter high. So that ambush basically must have stuck the barrel nearly into the cabin, So that really shook the community even further. And so people, the farmers started leaving. And of course, during the war, there was a Lord Cecil from Salisbury. And apparently he wanted to join the army, the Rhodesian army, but they wouldn't allow him because it would have been a bit of a diplomatica tamaleke, or, diplomatic difficult for Rhodesia if he was killed. So they allowed him and his partner Nick Downey to make documentaries of the war. And one afternoon we were on home from boarding school and standing at the barn, and we saw a deck in the distance, a paradeck, so a fire force, and we could hear now this was roughly where Ben's farm was, obviously not at the same time, Ben, this was months later. And we could hear the 20 mil of the K-car, hear fire, you couldn't see it. So there was obviously a contact going on there. And the next morning we got news that apparently this Lord Cecil was killed in this contact, while filming. And if you go onto the internet, there's some videos about the war in Rhodesia. And there's a video where there was a Rhodesian African Rifles had a contact, and one of their soldiers killed, and so they carried, they were carrying his body to the chopper, and one of the guys is this Lord Cecil Salisbury, because there's a caption underneath which says a week later he died, he was killed. And so now, of course, there was a big river, the Matric River, running through that area. So it went through our neighbors to the west, which was Jannie and Tannie Marie van der Merwe. Incidentally, Jannie was the brother of Saki, the people that detonated the landmine. So the river went through their farm into our farm, then into Hannes's farm, and then eventually into Uncle Stan's farm to the west, and it flowed into a big dam, a government dam. And just downstream of the dam was a big bridge over the Maratsi River. So that was the link between us and Inyati mine. And then one night they blew up the bridge. So we lost all our protection from Inyati mine, all the farmers on that side. Now, at that time, a lot of farmers had moved away, and eventually we were the only farmers left. My father, but he couldn't leave because the crops were on the field, and he first had to harvest that. So he had to come pay out of his pocket to get security, 3 guys, for protection on the farm. My parents rented a house in Salisbury, and my mother and we, the children, stayed in Salisbury. In the house, I still went a time or two to the farm in the holidays, but it was very sad because the day my mother left, we had the farm when she went to Salisbury. One of the workers' wife, Eunice, they were crying and hugging, because these farm workers were like our family, closer in a way than our family, because we were together every day. We cared for them. It was, it was. And the people we had were really good people, and then my father got to harvest the crop, and the day he evacuated, left the farm, he was giving stuff away to the work. And there was this one guy, one of the workers, Window was his name. And he still told my father, said, "What do I do with this stuff? I thank you, I appreciate the offer, but what do I do with this stuff? I've got nowhere to go. I've got no income. At least you can go and carve out another life. Yes, you've lost everything." So it was very sad. It's once again in war, it's the innocent people that suffer. So in any case, my father, after harvesting, he vacated the farm, moved all the tractors and equipment and everything to Headlands. Cattle he sold, So 1979, he spent, selling all the stuff, and most of the time basically just giving away. And then on the 31st of January 1918, we left for Fort Victoria. We overnighted with friends at the Morgenster mission station just outside Fort Victoria, because the next morning we had to catch the armed convoy to Beitbridge. We were not allowed to travel. You had to travel in the armed convoy because they attacked the motorists. So the convoy, there was a bakkie, so say 3 or 4 bakkies, one in front, one at the back, and maybe 1 or 2 spread out in between. It was usually manned by police reservists, so you had the driver armed with the FN, you had the passenger armed with the FN, then another guy at the back with the FN, and then at the back was a machine gun, somebody operating the machine gun. So we left. Now we had a bakkie with a, like this Venter sleepwandjies trailer in the back. I was driving the bakkie with my mother accompanying me. My father also was driving the car, also with a sleepwandjie, and my brother accompanying him. My sister was studying in Cape Town at that time. And we're driving along in the middle of, like we used to call it, the hot area, When the car behind pulled up came past next to my dad and showed him there's something wrong. So we pulled off, and what had happened, the wheel of the trailer had come off. So one of the bakkies stopped and they said, sorry, we cannot wait for you. We have to go. So they left. Fortunately, the two young guys that stopped, and they were each armed with the FN, because my father had to hand back in the FN, so we didn't have any form of decent firepower. All we had was our personal weapons, which was a 5-shot automatic shotgun, .303 and a .22 Hornet. And then Murphy struck the first time, because my father had got a spare tire for the trailer from our farm on Daintjie. Took it off, and guess what? The holes in the rim did not align with the nuts in the hub. So these two guys drove back to try and find the tire, and thankfully they found it, and we straddled along to a bike bridge. Very thankful to these guys. I wish one day I can run across them. I don't know who they are, because they were really good. It's appreciated that immensely. On the Rhodesian side, no problem. Got to South African side, Murphy struck again, strike 2. Just before we'd left, my father had got an agent, to do all the paperwork, and he was a Frans Borman. I was wondering if he's maybe family of General Borman, because I said he's Borman because he said he had family in Rhodesia. But unbeknownst to him and to us, as of the 1st of February 1980, South Africa raised the import tax on your second vehicle. I think it was something like 115% of your market value. So that was like a blow, because the little money we had in South Africa, my father needed that and to care for his family before he found a job. At that time, if you immigrated, you could take out less than if you went on holiday. I can't remember exactly, but say you could take out $1,000 per family when you immigrated, but if you went on holiday, you can take out $1,500 per family member. So a few months earlier, we'd gone to South Africa. It was still the days of travelers' checks. And my father cashed in on the way back all the checks, and he gave it to the cash to Sakkie van der Merwe, the farm that it was his farm and Ben was leasing, and him that detonated the landmine. So he was living in Utrecht. We left the cash there. So then we had to call him to bring this cash. Now, it was still funny because he arrived. We were waiting for him to arrive, and he handed the cash over the boom. When you go through, it looked nearly like a drug deal across the border. So in any case, we paid the money, and of course, my father was devastated. He just sat there. You could see this, this, as we say in Afrikaans, that was bloedgeld, that you had to give out. In any case, we eventually, like 4 o'clock or something in the afternoon, we got through the border. We were not even 5 minutes away through into South Africa when my father pulled over. So Sakkie was also driving along with us. He got out and he had a erge uitslag, a rash. Now, my father never, ever got a headache. But that day, with all the stress, he got a headache. First time I've seen him in my life with a headache. And my mother gave him a Disprin, but we did not know he was allergic to the Disprin. So then we waited next to the road for a while, and after a while he felt better, and we eventually drove further to Utrecht, where we overnighted at Sakkie, and very thankful to them for all the support and everything, really. But of course, I just wanted to mention, it was tough times for us, but there were many Rhodesians that went through even worse than what we did. At least we get something out, and most, if not all, Rhodesian lost friends in the war. But there were also many that lost families, a father, a mother, sister, brother, grandfather, grandmother. We were very blessed that we as a family, although we'd lost a lot, but we as a family came through intact. So we're very grateful to God for that, because I think of these people, also about the Portuguese. I was listening to Ferdi, and he was telling about them coming across farms, and I think there were some of the other speakers also in Angola, where the people basically left with the clothes on their body, so, and Mozambique the same. So I really, many days I think about these people, how bad that must have been, because for us it was really bad. In any case, we advanced to Cape Town, stayed with my father's brother Ati and his wife Tannie Jocelyn, very thankful to them also. But this was now, the school had been going for a month, and I was in Matric. So I desperately had to get into Matric. So, but my father was looking for a job to know where to buy a house, I must go to school. So we went to say hi to our neighbors in Duintjie and Tannie Ina van der Spy. They were living in Stellenbosch at the time. They said, why don't my dad put me in the hostel? So my father put me in the hostel in Paul Roos. Their children were also there. And then Murphy Strike 3. Now, although we followed the South African syllabus, maths in standard 9 and 10 ran as one course because maths had algebra and geometry. So in Rhodesia, we did in standard 9 half maths, half algebra, half geometry, and then Matric the other half. Laurus, they did all the algebra in standard 9 and just geometry and Matric. So I had to catch up that. But the school was really good. They got one of the teachers to give me extra lessons, Miss Dewey. And then by the grace of God, at the end of the year, I passed Matric with the university exemption. I wanted to go to Stellenbosch. I did apply, but with all the chaos, my application was too late. But that was a blessing in disguise because I don't know where we would have got the money. But of course, I need to mention that the hostel. Next to the hostel was a lawn where we used to play touch rugby and kick the ball. And at the edge of the lawn was a fence. And the other side was the university's proefplaas, I think it's a research farm in English. And just on the other side was the appelboord, the apple orchard. And, many a times we would accidentally on purpose kick the ball over the fence. And then, of course, every time that happened, we had a physics practical class because, there's the law of attraction between two bodies. So when we threw the ball back over the fence, the apples would come along. It's physics. I'm telling you, it's physics. And best apples, all the variety, Starkings, Golden Delicious, Granny Smith. It's the best I ever had in my life. Anyway, so the next year I had to urgently get a job, get money. And I got a job at the Department of Water Affairs in Cape Town. The office were near the Parliament. And one day I'm sitting there and this explosion goes off and I'm under the slant decking under the desk, and the other guys in the office burst out laughing. So next door they were busy building a new building, so they were blasting the foundation out in dynamite. But in any case, I have to tell you something to my embarrassment that happened that year. Because I was working there, I thought, well, I'm going to enroll at Success College and do through correspondence maths just to keep busy and maybe get a better mark. I did pass maths and everything, but just to keep busy. So at the end of the year, I had to go and write exams at the Tygerberg College. So I arrived there and I follow the instruction and I end up in the main hall and I look in there and it's just girls. Now, ek is af die plaas, so I'm very shy of girls and it's just girls. For me, those all felt the size of about 5 rugby fields, So I looked for the nearest table, and again, according to Murphy's Law, it won't be at the door. So it was a distance in, and I just dropped my head and I walked in and I sat. I don't look left, right, up. So after a while, the examinator came in and things started quieting down. And I realized somebody standing in front of me, and I just stare up, with my eyes like this, and and the guy's got this frown, and he said, "Meneer, is jy op die regte plek? So are you at the correct location?" I said, "Well, I think so." And the frown deepens, and he said, "Skryf jy haarkappery? Are you writing hairdressing?" By now, all the attention was on me. What's Afrikaans saying? Aarde sluk my in. So in any case, I stared tussen die bene, tail between the legs. I'm out of there, got the right place, wrote it. So wrote the exam. So the next year, I saved a bit of money. I started studying mechanical engineering at the Technikon. And while I was studying, at the Cape Town Technikon, while I was studying, I found out you can study engineering through the Air Force. And so this was my plan because I also always wanted to go into the aerospace aeronautical industry. And I had also to do some practical for the course. And then so June 83, I was called up. So I thought I'll go and do for national service. I'll go and do my basics and then try and get into the Air Force. So I was called up to Kimberley, one onderhoudseenheid, one maintenance unit. We had the Blue Berets. They used to call us the seep tellers and the jam stealers, the soap counters and the jam stealers. We were next to Danitron, where General Borman was. We used to go and play rugby because the rugby fields were at their location. So I So the January next year, I would have gone for selection in the Air Force, but I went on to JL. So usually we would go up to Pretoria after basics to cardio school. But they came down to start the JLs there because over December we had to guard the ammunition depot at Jan Kempthorp, which is just, Warrington is the next town north of Kimberley, and Jan Kempthorp is just near Warrington. So we guarded that one. I just want to say Kimberley is extremely cold. We were in the winter because I was a winter intake. It was very cold. At one time we didn't have hot water in the bungalow, so we had to shower in cold water in the winter. It's very cold. In any case, the January we went up to cardio school, Krijgdienst school. I don't know, I can't remember what it was in English, is where you did the JL. So then when I arrived there, I went for the selection because what I wanted to do was, they call it to study, they call it task book officer. So I went to Tentadorp, which is near the Institute for Aviation Medicine, near in Verwoerdburg, and it's just behind the Air Force's STO, School for Technische Opleiding, School for Technical Training. So we had the week there, you know, interviews and whatever, and at the end of the week, if you accepted, you had to sign. But there was this whole row. You went from one desk, you moved on and signed. And I must say the insurance guys were well organized because they were at the end of the line, Metropolitan, Sanlam, and I think a lot of young guys signed for an insurance policy thinking you must do that to join the Air Force. In any case, I went back to cardio school, cleared out. I went to do orientation for 2 weeks because I'd already done basics at the gym, the Air Force gym just opposite Air Force Base Swartkops. And then I went for selection, officer selection, got selected, but to start in May of that year at the Air Force College. But then to keep me busy, they sent me to Verwoerdburg Technische College to do what they call a school block. Now, maybe I should just mention something about the engineering training in South Africa at that time. You had 3 institutions for engineering training. The one was the Technical College, Technische College, where you did what they call school blocks. It was from N1 to N6, and they were about, I think, 4 months. So the apprentices in the Air Force would do this. You know, they do a school block, and then they go and do hands-on at the squadron or at the technical base. And then when they go and do after apprenticeship, do the trade test, I think they had to have academically N3, qualify as an artisan. And you did 4 subjects there: engineering, maths, engineering, science, engineering drawings, and then your trade. So I did the mechanical side. It was vliegtuigonderhoudstheorie, aircraft maintenance theory, where you learned about the systems, how they worked, and also the maintenance practices. Then from N4, if you do N6, you get a technical diploma, and you also 4 subjects, I think, per school block, but you did more engineering, you know, like fluid mechanics, strength of materials, things like that. Second institution was the Technikon. At that time, they had a national diploma, which was 3 years. A national higher diploma was a year. And then a diploma in technology was like a master's diploma. I don't know why they called it technology. And they did later years, I believe now it's called the university, not a Technikon anymore. It's a University of Technology. And I was listening to Admiral Sutherland mentioning in Israel, I think his cover story was working at the Technikon. So I was wondering if that concept didn't come from the Technikon concept, come from Israel, you know. And also the course structure and the quality, the name of change. It's now called, I think, a bachelor's in technology, a BTech, and you can do an MTech, DTech, like a. In any case, so the course at that time was a semester, so you did 6 subjects. The same type of subjects as university, especially your core subjects, you know, like, for example, in a mechanical field, which I studied, was strength of materials. So that's how to calculate the stresses if a structure or object item is loaded. You're subjected to loads and this, you know, the safety margin. Then you did fluid mechanics. It's all about pressures and flows, thermodynamics, and then mechanics of machines. In mechanics of machines at University Stellenbosch, they call it dynamics. And then you did machine design. Now, machine design exam, both at Technikon and university, like we say in Afrikaans, was 'n roller geweest, because in the morning you wrote a 3-hour exam, and then in the afternoon you wrote a 4, where you did the theory. In the afternoon was then the 4-hour exam, which you actually got a design to do the layout, do the calculations, do the drawing. So at the end of the day, you were pretty tired. any case, so the diploma also had a practical content, and then obviously you had university, which was 4 years, 2 semesters per year, also doing 6 subjects. Some subjects also had a task, like for example in aerodynamics we had to design a propeller on top of the class itself. Machine design, you also had a design task, and then in the final you also had thesis. Now, why I mentioned this course is I just want to say our training were really good. That's most probably one of the best in the world, and I can attest to that because I worked after my Air Force days. I worked in the aerospace industry, both in Europe and in North America, and I just want to say that our training were really good. And one of the major points or reasons I believe is we were taught fundamentals, not recipes. In fact, I would argue that fundamentals is important for every aspect of life. If you listen to Kevin's talks on entrepreneurship, it's fundamentals he talks about, because if you don't follow fundamentals, you might get lucky for a while, but it's not sustainable, you know. So, and that's any aspect of life, relationships, sports, business, you know, finances, whatever. And then the second element that we had in South Africa was the sanctions, which was a blessing in disguise. And I'm talking about in the engineering field, because there you had to boer maak 'n plan. So it made you think out of the box, you know. So that was very good experience. So I'm very thankful for that. I just want to mention your case. One of the companies I was working in North America, I was called in to sit in the interviews for students coming to do holiday work. Now, if you take a subject like strength of materials, we did it out of the 8 semesters at university. I think we did 6 of them, strength of materials. Technicon, we did it each semester except for the first year, which was basic sciences. So this student comes in. Was the one thing I did not understand when I started working in North America, the first time I went there, was you had to give your transcripts, your subjects. I thought that's weird because in South Africa, you know, if you go to Pretoria Technikon or Cape Town Technikon, it's the same standard. Whether you go to Tikkies or Maties, it's the same standard. Then I realized you can have a degree, but you could have done not a good subjects. So to give you an example, this guy comes in, he's 6 months away from graduating as a mechanical engineer. Of course, he hadn't done not even one subject of strength of material, which is one of your fundamental base of mechanical engineering. You know, they do one term of fluid mechanics. We did like at least 4 semesters, you know, at university. So it was a eye opener for me, you know. So that's why it's important to know the subject, you know. And of course, you must see the subject. I was surprised. It's like things like studying engineering, pottery, jewelry design, foreign, because they've got these electives. You know, you must learn of other things of life, not just engineering. So even one was Society of Sexuality on the transcript list. So I was very, very shocked in that case there. So I did the school block, then went on officers course, and then after officers course, the last 3 months of that year, we did academische aanpassingskursus. I guess it's academic orientation course. It was presented by the mechanical engineering office in Voortrekker Hoogte, and we did first year engineering, maths, physics, chemistry, and applied maths. And the reason for that were twofold. Firstly, to prepare you for the study, and secondly, it was like a selection. If the student is up to scratch to go and study, and then whether you go to Technikon or to university. Now, of course, we were a bunch of 9 guys or so that moved from officers course and studied. You know, people like Pierre Duplessis, Jan Venter, Conley Meyer, Stan Henning, Henny Stein, Elgard Brink, Gavin Nauschutz, Rainer Kutse, and Peter de Bruin. We were the one. Now, one of the guys, Tian, he told me he's not going to be selected to go and study. I said, I'll take you a bet for 5 ice creams that you're going to be selected to go and study. So now, why ice cream is important, I'm not a drinker, ek is 'n geheuonthouer, what a teetotaler, I think, but my weakness is ice cream, because it's worse than a drug addict having to say to heroin, crack all at once, you know. So, and there's a very special technique in eating ice cream, because you need to make it not quite a fluid, but just soft, so your volumetric intake is much more than just eating it with a spoon. So there's engineering behind eating ice cream. In any case, he So we took this bet for 5 ice creams. So he got selected to go and study. So he had to pay his debt. But he said, okay, I'll pay it, but you have to eat all the ice creams on one day. You know, we go one place, we buy. I said, no problem. You can make it 10 if you want to. So we go to an ice cream shop near Tukkies, and he walks in, buys the first ice cream. He comes out, he goes in, buys the second ice cream. I said, bring the third one. He walks in, he comes out with no ice cream. I said, what now? He said, no, he's too embarrassed to buy him another ice cream there. So we went to, on Church Street was Milky Co. So we went there, he bought 2 ice creams there and got embarrassed. And then we went to a lollipop was next. So I got my ice cream. Now, of course, at the end of that course, I was afforded the opportunity to go to university to study there. Now, but if you went to study engineering, you had to go to Stellenbosch at the engineering faculty. And I had a bit of a problem. Love was in the air, and I had met Olivia. And secondly, which meant if I went to Stellenbosch, I would be away from her. And secondly, I was so close to getting my diploma, you know, so I could get rank quicker, I could get a decent salary quicker. So I decided to finish my technical studies. By the guidance and the grace of God, that was a very good decision, because eventually Olivia and I got married in 1986, and we're still married to this day. And I can say honestly, happily married. Not like some guy said, he said him and his wife is happily married, his wife is happy and he's married. Not like that. and then just a while later, I went to study at Stellenbosch and got my degree. So how do they say in English? All's well that ends well. So if there's any question, just let me know, because before I. So in any case, then I was posted to Air Force Station Voortrekker Hoogte. We just called it VTH. Now VTH housed a few units. One of them was 10 Air Depot, which was a stores. And then there was the Air Publications Depot. So all the publications in the Air Force was managed and coordinated through them. And then there was one air depot. Now, one air depot had sort of 2 main sections. The one was a manufacturing one, which I'll get into more detail. And the other one was the overhaul of engines. And then there was ALC, Air Logistics Command, or in Afrikaans, LLK, the Luglogistieke Commandement. People used to joke with us and say the LLK stands for Lugleegte Commandement. So, and in any case, so that was the officer commanding at that time was the Brigadier Das Koenig. And he had 2 main sections. The one was the aircraft systems. So the SSO aircraft system, and then under him was all the system managers, staff officer or SO, Mirage, big Buccaneer, Impala, Canberras, helicopters, light and transport aircraft, ground support equipment. So they managed the systems. You know, there's a modification, it was released through them. If there was problems on the squadron, they would assist and help them, and you know, so they were the system managers. And there was also another department. It was called under aircraft system RTO, Residentiële Technische Officer, Residential Technical Officer. That was a team at Atlas Aircraft Corporation, because the Impala, Mirage, all the Mirages, the helicopters was the heavy maintenance was done there. So this team was there as liaison between Air Force and the Atlas, and they also accepted the aircraft after the servicing. The other part in ALC was the Chief of Engineering Service, CEng, or HND, Hoofingenieursdienste. Now, at that time, it was Colonel John Wesley. He retired as a Brigadier General and then went to work for CSIR, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. He was first a pilot, he flew Impalas, and then he went to study engineering. But of course, what an incredible, wonderful person. He did so much, not just a good person, but also very knowledgeable engineer. He did so much for engineering in the Air Force and the wider industry. And he had an incredible, a big, massive impact on my career, and in an extremely positive way. I've got the utmost respect for him, you know, always. So under him, you had the mechanical engineering officers at ALC. There was also an electronic engineering office at 4 Air Depot in Snake Valley. I think they focused on radar. The Cactus radar was also their home base, I think, or servicing was done there. And then you had an electronic engineering office at the 5 Air Depot, for focusing on avionics. And I think at that time, later on, it became bigger, also engineering office at 2 Air Depot in Cape Town at Oysterplaat. They also had a drafting office where the draftsmen worked, nowadays they call design engineer. There was also a laboratory with metallurgic and chemical engineers, so they dealt with all the materials and everything. And one of their big responsibilities of the lab was what they call SOAP, Statistic Oil Analysis Program. So at regular intervals, the squadron would send samples of the oil from the aircraft, and then these guys would analyze it to see if the contamination is within limits, in the oil. So then we had there was also a metrology department, not meteorology, which is where the metrology is about measurements. And they had a state-of-the-art machine. It had these probes, and you put the part on this bed, and it would go over there and measure it very accurately to see if it's correct. So that was ALC. So quite a good engineering function, in all branches of engineering. So I started doing my first block of practical at 1 Air Depot in the manufacturing side in January. And the purpose of going through the manufacturing area is to understand manufacturing. So then when you do a design, it's manufacturable. At university, we also had a subject, design for manufacturing. So you need to understand that. So we went through that practical part. We had a task book. It's a thick one like this. I've still got it like that. And it was very structured. Each of the tasks were laid out, and you had to write up the task, and then whoever supervised you, because you physically did the work, they would sign it off. So it wasn't just doing stuff. Now we started off in the welding shop, and I'll go through all the workshop, which will also give you an indication of the capabilities, So we started in a welding shop, and they had all the types of welding, arc welding, MIG, TIG. And of course, these welders, they knew their stuff. I think they had to be every 6 months go for the test to be certified as an aircraft welder. So they would go and do a weld. They would cut this weld up and X-ray it to see that these guys are up to standard. The other capability they had in there was a metal spray. Now, when parents have babies, sometimes they keep the baby shoes and they bronze it, to keep it as a momentum. So this is metal spray. So in any case, I had to find an object because, to metal spray. So I had fellies, those with the leather with a suede with little hairs. But, with time, the muck and the grime and the dirt, it flattens the hair and it looks ugly. So I thought it's a time to buy new fellies. But before you metal spray it, you have to go to the sandblasting shop to clean all this muck and grime for the metal to adhere to. So I went to the sandblasting shop, cleaned the shoes. When I took it out, it was brand new, because it cleaned out the what. I decided, now I've got a new pair of fellies. So I think I went back once or twice more. When the fellies started looking bad, I sandblasted. Eventually, I had to throw the shoes away because the soles were worn through. Then we went to the next shop, which was the plating shop. So that's where you chrome plating, cadmium plating, nickel plating, and then we moved on to the rubber and plastic shop. Now the rubber and plastic shop is if there was a window, that they make the aircraft windows if it had to be replaced out of perspex or whatever the case might be. And then on the rubber side, they also made, like, for example, seals, rubber seals, they would cast it for aircraft parts, so very, very good capability. Of course, at that time, we were COWs, Kandidaat Officier, or COs, candidate officers, not commanding officers like in the US. And we stayed in a mess in Skinner Street, and we parked our cars outside. So one morning I came out, and the window at the back, the small window, was smashed, and they stolen my tape. So I thought, I'm not going to buy a window. So I went to the rubber and plastic shop, and I made a window out of perspex and installed it. And good luck with trying to smash that one. So, in any case, then we went to the apprentice shop. This is where the apprentices, the fitters and turners, would do their training. They were in the same building as the actual machine shop. There was just an open doorway between them. Of course, this machine shop was incredible. The capabilities they had, the parts that they made, aircraft parts. It was really impressive to see this. We ourselves, as I said, in the apprentice shop, we had to make ourselves a bench vise, starting from scratch, do all the machining, milling machine lathes, which I still got to this day. It's mounted on my workbench in the garage. And then the jaws of the vice, we had to go to the heat treatment shop. So there was also a heat treatment shop. So this is where, you know, the heat treating, and especially the guys from the laboratory, you involved in that, in defining the heat treatment process. So we had to harden the jaws of the vice, you know, so we got exposure to heat treatment also. Then the next shop we moved on to was the sheet metal shop. This is where they would do all the structural repairs or build off of damaged aircraft of that. When we were there, we made a toolbox. You know, you used to get this Jador toolbox that you pull it open like that. I've still got mine today. It's made out of aluminium. But of course, in one of the sections in there was where they made the hydraulic fuel lines, the pipes, and fuel and hydraulic pipes. And there was a Mr. Meyer there, but this guy was an absolute artist at his work, because, you know, they would take a straight tube and they have to bend it in a very complex curve for it just to fit into the aircraft. And if you take a tube and you bend it, in the bend it tends to flatten, which you don't want, because that affects your flows and your pressure losses, or the pressure losses for a given flow, blah, blah, blah. So in any case, what he did, he had silicone, clean silicone like a sand, but clean. So you would fill the pipe, the straight pipe, with this, cap it at the end, and then start bending it. So this filling kept it from necking. It was really, it's so simple but so effective. But you know, the way he had to bend it was the path was so complex, and how he got the spot on it was incredible. It's really. Then we moved on to the casting shop, because they used to, some of the parts were casted first, and then they would go to the machine shop to be machined to dimensions, and then sometimes it would be plated. Sometimes just part of the component is plated in the plating shop. So we made models out of aluminium, and we made Impala and Mirage F1 models. And you know, the first part they made, because they had this mold, they had a sand block. They put the mold in with a layer of sand, then they fill it with sand around it. They put the top block and fill the sand around the mold, then lift up, separate this block, take the mold out, and then pour the melted metal in there. To make those molds, the first one, and they were mold makers. These guys knew their stuff, you know, because it's like a technical artist. Anyway, so that was the first block. The second block, I went to the engine overhauling side of one air depot. On the engine. So at that time, they were servicing the Allison engines of the C-130. It's got now a new engine with the mid-light upgrade. They got another engine now, if I remember correctly. The Continental engine of the Cessna C-185, and then the Lycoming engine of the Bosbok and Kudus. Earlier, they also had serviced the Griffin engine of the Shackleton, the Goblin engine of the Vampire, and the Orienda engine of the Sabre. But you know, those aircrafts were out of service then. So so they had, the main shop was the engine repair shop, where they'd strip it down and overhaul the engine, but they had satellite workshops. One of them was the engine bay. So when they remove an engine from a C-130, they remove the nacelle with the engine, and it comes to the engine bay, and there the engine is taken out and then moved to the engine repair shop. They also had a piston shop where they, you know, all the piston work and barrels and that work was done. There was also a component shop, which was that all the complex servicing of all the complex parts, like fuel control units and those type of things. And then there was a propeller shop where they serviced the propellers and balanced the propellers. Now, tragically, when we were there was a technician pouring hydraulic fluid out of a 45-gallon drum. It was flowing too slow, and he put compressed air in the top to force it out quick, and they don't mix, and it exploded. It killed him instantaneously. Now, the buildings dated out of the Second World War, if not earlier, and it had these massive big beams. And you should have seen the force of that explosion. It broke those beams. But in any case, so once the engines are assembled again, it goes to the test section. So there was a test section, and there was a big hall dedicated for the Griffin engine, the Shackleton one. And when I was there, I was fortunate to witness one of these engines being tested. But of course, this is impressive. This is raw power. You smell, feel, hear. It's incredibly impressive thing to witness. Also, we were fortunate that they were busy. They were also testing a Goblin engine of the Vampire, so we could witness that. So we spent some time there, which was also very good. They would have these test cells where they would mount the engine, couple all the sensors, and then there was a control room from where they do all the testing. At that time, there was a Mr. Moths. He was a retired guy. This guy, of course, he was fit. He was 70 years old. Push-ups. He would challenge the young guys, would challenge them, and he would outdo them in push-ups. But he was servicing, like, I think it was a Tiger Moth engine, one of these older engine for the museum, so you also had functions like that. But because at the test section, some funny incident, every Friday we would bring meat into work, and then half an hour before lunch, somebody would light the fire, and so that we braai it at lunchtime. So there was one of the guys there was a Flight Sergeant Tony Liggett. What a fantastic person, but very quiet person. Now, Tony always waited until everybody has braai because he didn't like the fire that hot. And so he was standing there, and one of the new guys asked him, "Tony, aren't you going to braai?" He said, and he puts a sad face on. He said, "No, I haven't got money. I'm too poor to buy meat. So I just stand here in the smoke, and it goes into my jersey. And tonight when I get home, my children can get my jersey and suck on it just to get the taste of braai." So in any case, the second part of that block, we went to Squadron. So that's now on systems and Squadron life. So I went to 19 Squadron at Swartkops on the Pumas. So that part I did there. And then our third block, I came back to the engineering office and then started working design work at ALC. Of course, when you get your diploma and your degree, you have to go and do what they call a junior logistics course, JLOC. It's 3 months, and it's all about system and logistic engineering. You do various modules like quality assurance, reliability-centered maintenance, configuration management, all those type of things. Now, I can't remember much of that, but I remember one of the lecturers was somebody from the Auditor General. Can't remember anything of what his lecture went about, but I remember some of the cases that he investigated. And he told us the one case, which was quite interesting, was the national servicemen, the driver, they would, for example, go to Windhoek and pick up supplies and take it to whatever base, Grootfontein or Dangwa, wherever they went. And on the way, they had offset punted distribution points with the locals. So they would sell it to them, the military stuff. And he said when that guy cleared out, completed his national service, he would sell his business rights to the next guy coming in. And he said at that time, some of them sold it for up to 1,000 rand. At that time, that was a lot of money. The other case that he mentioned was a national serviceman at Air Force Base Swartkops who decided to register a brand new Toyota Corolla military vehicle onto his name, basically steal it. Nobody picked it up, but then in his second year, he decided it's time for a trade-in, and that's when they caught him. So if he just kept quiet, he would have got away with a free car. And then the other course, somebody presented, there was a Commandant Alan Norrie. He retired as a brigadier general. He was a technical officer. And during one of the lunch breaks, we were talking to him, and he told us about this unit, the Test Flight and Development Center, and that's where the technology stuff happened, Because I think when he was a captain or a major, he was a technical officer there. So he told us about what they did and what they, about the test pilots working there and the flight test engineers and this really, like we say in Afrikaans, het my belangstelling verskriklik geprikkel, so it piqued my interest. And, said, how do you get into this, because this is like something big, And he said, well, just look out for a signal. If there's a course, they send out signals for people to come for selection and all that. So I kept on working at the engineering office in Vertrekker Hoogte. Now, I went back and worked there. Now, we did all the mechanical engineering support in the Air Force, and at that range there were various tasks. It could have been from an investigation to modifying aircraft. One of the tasks was modifying the bomb racks, new bomb racks on the bomber aircraft, the Buccaneer, Canberra, ground support equipment. There was also an office, as I said, in 2 Air Depot, but I think at that time it was fairly small. It became larger later years in Cape Town. So we did all the mechanical engineering stuff, and it could vary. You know, one time there was an issue with the test bench for, I think it was the carburetors fuels. I think they were at Rand or Germiston Airport, and they serviced the heavy maintenance for the Harvards, the DAX, and the DC-4 Skymaster. And there was an issue, so one of the engineers went there to try and, you know, support and sort this out. It was funny, the hangar in which they had the DC-4, the ceiling or the trusses were too low, so they had to lift the nose up, move it in so that the tail is down, find a spot, and then lower. If I remember correctly, actually one of them, there was a fire once and they couldn't get it out quick enough. So not to seem to remember something like that. In any case, so I worked there in the engineering office, and then in mechanical engineering office, and then at Lugleegte Commandement. And then in 88, the signal came out for people who are interested to come for selection for the flight test course. So they gave you had to study the material because you had to write 4 exams. It was maths, and then it was like the mechanics / applied maths. Third one was aerodynamics, and then you had to write an essay. You might ask, why an essay? The deliverable of any flight test program is a test report. So they wanted to see your report writing capability and also reasoning. So those were the 4 exams we had to write. We got all the material studied, and it was in Rhodesian because TFDC was at that time in Rhodesian. Flew the Monday down on the shuttle with the Flossie to Oysterplaat. They picked us up on the bus, and on the way, our selection was on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. On the way there, I took the books out because, you know, while driving, you know, used the time, and I was studying up a bit. And one or two guys asked me, why are you studying? And I jokingly said, no, we're writing exams tonight. And we forgot about it. We arrived there, it was dark when we arrived there, went to the offices and met with Rob Sproul. He was a rotary wing test pilot and the coordinator of the selection. And he said, guys, there's a change of plan. We have to end early. No, so we'll do selection Tuesday and Wednesday. So tonight you have to write maths. The guys turned to me and said, how did you know that? I said, no, I don't know. I just joked with you. In any case, so we wrote the exams. And then, but on top of the exams, we also had interviews, and they were very difficult because, you know, apart from your academic capability, they also wanted to check because, you know, a test pilot and a flight test engineer works very closely in a team. So they want to see your capability, teamwork. You also communicate with various functions. So how do you communicate? How do you think on your feet? You know, so those interviews were very difficult. You know, they were like Colonel Duncan Cook, who was chief test pilot, Rob Sproul, obviously, Major General Des Barker, at that time commandant, and a few others. So it was, that part was really difficult. Now, you know, I went into this because this was something big, you know, but, you know, like Kevin said, courage. That's, you know, in his talks, courage. And the other thing is also, you know, the saying, if you don't buy a bus ticket, you cannot ride on the bus, you know. So if you don't try, how do you know? You know, so in any case, we went back, and a while later we got a letter from Colonel Murray, who was the officer commanding of TFDC and the director of flight test in the Air Force. And they sent us letter. I've still got my letter to this day. You know, it was in Afrikaans. Dankie vir die belangstelling in die experimentele toetsvliegkursus. And by the grace of God, I was selected to go on this course. So this was a big thing. But, you know, I felt like a small dog, you know, fox terrier chasing a car. Now I've caught the car. What do I do with this? You know, because, so in any case, we started with a pre-study phase in last 3 months of 88. You know, doing maths and science and maths and aerodynamics, just catching up, an introduction to flight test. And then the course was in the next year from January, a full course, and I'll talk more about it. But I need to mention here something. Obviously, the pilots, so we were 8 that were selected to go on the course from the Air Force side. It was 2 fixed-wing test pilots, George Miller, that time Major, he was also flew in the Silver Falcons, the aerobatic team, and Andy Dunn, a captain. And then it was Major Chippy Cross and Captain Alan Matheson at that time. They were rotary wing test pilots, sorry. And then we were 4 engineers, all lieutenants. It was Pierre Fouchier, Louis Brever, Mike Bartlett, and myself. And on the course, we were joined by 3 Atlas flight test engineer students. Johan Vechter, we used to call him Johnny the Mesh, after those comics, the fotoverhalen, Murray Payton, and Egon Gitter. He did a lot of flight testing on the Rooivalk. So we were on that course. Now, obviously the pilots, they'd done maths a while back, so their maths were not fresh. So 2 of the guys, I won't mention names, would come every night, 7 o'clock, and I would help them with the maths just to refresh them, So one night, they are not there. We at that time, my wife and I were living in Sunnyside in an apartment. So they did not arrive. And I wondered what happened to them, because they always on time. So eventually, like 1:15 or so, I opened the door to see if they're not there, because you had that balcony, you walked along to the door, and yeah, they're standing. They said, no, we were at 7 o'clock, but the apartments were so close together, and the building next door, there was a live show going on. The people, the husband and wife or boyfriend, had the window open, so they were watching this. That's why I won't mention their names. Any case, Chris, maybe just a few words on the course itself. It's presented by Test Pilot School. At that time, there were only 5 recognized test pilot schools in the world. It was the ETPS, the Empire Test Pilot School in England, and I think they were the first test pilot school. Then there was EPNER, which is the French one. That's the acronym EPNER. I'm not quite sure the full name. École, blah, blah, SA, whatever. And then there was the US Navy Test Pilot School in Patuxent River, and the US Air Force Test Pilot School in Edwards Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert, California. And then there was National Test Pilot School, the first civilian test pilot school, which is just outside Air Force Base in the town Mojave, in California. And with the sanctions, obviously we could not go to military schools, but NTPS, the civilian one, was prepared to come to us because they didn't have the restrictions that the military schools had. So they came out and presented the course at Atlas Aircraft Corporation. So the course itself is a year-long course. There's 3 main phases. The first one is performance. It's all the performance, and it also includes, like takeoff, landing, cruise, turn performance, climb performance. But there's also other subjects like pitot-static calibration, propulsion, other subjects. You also do in the beginning of that, like more advanced aerodynamics and things. And then you have flying qualities as second phase. That's 2 parts. The quantitative part is stability and control. Things like longitudinal static stability, longitudinal dynamic stability, lateral directional static stability, and also the dynamic stability and stall characteristics and things like that. The other part of the flying qualities is to do with the qualitative part, which is we call it handling qualities. So all this flying quality is about how the aircraft handle. Is it stable? Is it not stable? That type of thing. And then the last phase was systems and structures. Now, in all of these phases, you covered 3 main elements. The first was the theory. Secondly was the flight test technique. We had specific flight test techniques. And the third is the data analysis of the data that you collect. We also covered other modules like human factors. So that's things like if there's a switch, can you reach it? Is there tactile, what we call tactile feedback? Can you feel a force, or even identify it? You'll see, for example, landing gears, they've all got this round wheel at the end of the lever. And that's actually a certification regulation. You must have it so the pilot can, identify it by tactile feel, and legibility of displays, and all those type of things. So we also covered that. Now, so those are the cores, but then you had other aspects also, like obviously writing test plans, writing test reports. Now, test report was also a very structured way in which you did it. In the results and the discussion, we followed what we call the 7-point paragraph. So for a test point, you would present the test condition, at what test airspeed, altitude was it tested, the test results itself. Then you would discuss the result is the third part. And the fourth part is what we call role relation. How does this test result, what does it mean when the aircraft is doing its actual function, its role? And then regulation compliance or spec compliance, and then conclusions and recommendations. So very structured. We wrote, like we say in the Air Force, reports up the yin yang, a lot of it, presentations, a lot of presentations. And then in each phase, at the end of the performance phase, you got a project at the end of the phase. So you had to write the test plan, present it to a technical and safety review board, go and do the test, do the data analysis, and then also give a presentation. Write a report and also presentation. Those were nightmares. The presentation was a nightmare because the guys, the already qualified guys from TFDC and Atlas would come and they ought to ask you very difficult questions. And you have to think on your feet too. That's the same for the flying qualities. And then you had a thesis throughout the year that you had to work on. And then at the end, they gave you, in our course, they gave us what they call an unknown. So if there's an aircraft that's never flown before, brand new one, how do you do the testing, just starting with the first flight and all that? So we got 7 hours. We only got the engine, structural and system limitation. So we had to determine the performance, flying qualities, obviously within a limited scope. We even had to, like the CG envelope, the center of gravity envelope, those type of things. So very good exercise, excellent learning curve, exercise. So that was the course in broad. We also, the tough part was especially the flying phase, because we had to be there like 5 o'clock in the morning to brief. 6 o'clock we started flying. You get home at 5, 6 o'clock, prepare for the next day, start doing your data analysis report. So it was a lot of work, We also had in the flying phase what they call demos and graded. So demo, the instructor would go out and show you how to do the test technique and everything. And then the graded, you must do everything yourself. You must plan the flight, brief. And in the briefing, they'll ask you, why did you select this airspeed? Why did you select this center of gravity? So you have to know your theory also. And then you would do the test. In the test, they would also evaluate your airmanship. For example, the communication between the pilot and the flight test engineer. One thing they were very strict on is that you use your time every available minute in the air, because it's expensive to keep an aircraft in the air. You don't want to sit there for long times being idle. You also, the coordinate, what they say, keep ahead of your test. So while the test pilot student is busy with the test, the engineer would just give him a warning, but obviously at the appropriate time, because you don't want to distract him. What's the next point, so that when he's finished, you step on immediately to the other one, so the things flow. So things like that they would also assess. Then you obviously do data reduction and write a report. Report was a nightmare for everybody because nobody likes writing report. Our instructors were. The boss was a guy, Sean Roberts. He came from Ireland, and he had was an instructor at the US Air Force Test Pilot School. One of the helicopter instructors was John Bishop. He flew in Vietnam before he actually became a test pilot. Paul Young was a fixed wing instructor. He was also flew in Vietnam before becoming instructor. And this guy worked at the Pentagon for a while, writing a massive report. So he was very strict on report writing. Some of us rewrote our reports 3 times, or wrote the report 3 times. And my English was not very delicious, not even today, but that time even more so, so it was a bit of a struggle. Then we had we had Wayne Painter, was one of the other instructors. He was an engineer at NASA. He worked on the re-entry phase of the space shuttle. And then we had a guy, he was a colorful chap, a very big guy, Red Leighton, Professor Red Leighton. He was a lecturer at the Naval Postgraduate School. But in his earlier days, he was in the Navy. He flew, he was a pilot. And then way back, he flew airships. Now, of course, you know, in the Air Force, when the pilots go through the sound barrier, you know, they wear this Mach 1 or Mach 2 badge. Red used to tell us they had a badge with the airship Mach 0.00000. So we did the course. It was a very hard course. You know, many days Andy and I, because I used to get a ride with him, you know, we'd sit there and we say, man, this is tough. You know, you can anytime go and say, take me off the course. And we would, in a moment of weakness, you know, cowboys don't cry in front of the horses. We tell each other, you know, we won't mind being kicked off the course because this is tough, but we haven't got the guts to go and tell them to kick us off the course. So we fast paid, and thankfully we came through that. And but we also had fun. You know, there were some moments. When we started the course, computers were not there. You know, so all our reports was handwritten. And then around about March, computers started getting out. And this was in the busy time of the performance phase when we had our project. So some people bought computers. Now, one of the guys, I won't mention his name, he bought a computer. But, you know, the formatting, it wasn't like today in Word. You know, so what he would do, he would just type his report. And then he would print screen. And then he would cut out the heading and he would stick it on a page. Then he would pay number 1 with the first line, he would put it like this, second line. Now, I won't mention his name, but we called this the MB cut and paste technique. You know. So then the other interesting incidents, we were doing tests one day in the Dakota, and we had to vary the CG for, you know, for the various degrees of stability. So we got Red and Wen and on board, you know, for the ballast. So, and a few other people. So Red and Wen, they would sit in the front when we do the forward CG, and they would fall asleep. And then when we finish, we tap them on the shoulder, move to the next position. And then when we did the aft CG test, we got Red, because he was the biggest, to sit on the toilet. And Wen was standing in the toilet door, and some other guys also in the toilet door to get the aft CG. So we call these guys our voice-activated variable ballast. And then one day we were also doing lateral directional testing on the Dakota, and Andy was the student pilot flying Andy Dunn. We had engineers were in the back, and we had our instruments. So what you do is the pilot gives a left rudder input and then the opposite aileron input, and you increase it. And from the data, you can plot your plots for the stability. So we go, you know, like an 1/8 rudder deflection, a quarter, 3/8, half. So we get to full rudder deflection. And now the forces were very high. It was like 180 pounds or something like that. So we see the needle, the sidestep needle is not moving, you know, on the rack, because we're facing back now. And we look back, and Andy is like shifting like this, you know. And we said, Andy, full rudder deflection. And he went, yes, man, I'm trying. So eventually he got it there. Now, what would happen usually, he would say stable read, you know, like he's on condition, the pilot, and you read, and then you say clear. So we decided we're not going to say clear. And we see his leg start, you know, with the force, it starts vibrating like this. And eventually he said, we just kept quiet. He said, I'm letting go. So we had fun like that. At the end of the year, we, again, by the grace of God, purely that I graduated, passed, and we had our ceremony. General Jan van Lochenberg, he was handed over our certificate at the ceremony. So then I was posted to TFDC, Test Flight and Development Center in Bredasdorp. So we arrived, my family and I, that's my wife and 2 sons, we arrived the January in Bredasdorp. Now, for people who don't know where Bredasdorp is, it's about 190 kilometers southeast of Cape Town and about 30 to 35 kilometers north of the most southern tip of Africa, Algalas. So we arrived in, of course, on the other Air Force bases, the Air Force houses were on the premises of the Air Force. In this case, our houses were amongst the civilian in the town, in Bredasdorp, so very nice. And my family and I, we spent 10 lovely years, one of the best times of our lives there. Interestingly, we also had a real princess in that area. She was Princess Charlotte von Liechtenstein, and she was married to Piaka van der Bijl. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and later Defense in Rhodesia. So their family farm, the Van der Bijls, and I believe they were also the founding fathers, his predecessors of Napier. They named it after the Governor General at that time, Sir George Napier of the Cape. So their farm was just outside Napier. Napier was 17 kilometers from Rhodesia, neighboring towns. Obviously, big rivals on the rugby field. It was like war when the two teams played against each other. TFDC itself, if you take the road from Rhodesdorp to Varnixkrans or Arniston, nearly halfway there, if you turn off left, the base was about 5 or 7 kilometers away from the main road. If you continue just before you get into Varnixkrans, you get the entrance on the left-hand side to the Overberg test range or UTB, Wifferberg Toetsbaan. And as you know, they were built to launch satellites, and they had incredible instrumentation facilities. It was like an open air laboratory, and we worked very closely with them, especially on weapons clearances, which I'll get to later. So, because maybe just a little bit brief history about TFDC. So in the mid-60s, when the boycott started, the Air Force identified the need to be self-sufficient in terms of developing the weapons and the aircraft to the latest technology, because they couldn't simply go to a company and buy, you know. So as a subset of that, they also identified the need for a flight test and evaluation capability in-house. So to that end, the first person sent on a flight test course was a Brigadier Botma. He was sent in the latter part of the 60s to ETPS in England to do. He was a fixed-wing test pilot. Then in the early 70s, at different times, Colonel Jan Marais and Major Robbie Dean was sent also to ETPS. Colonel Marais was, I think, a major at the time. He was a fixed-wing test pilot. And Major Dean was the first rotary wing test pilot to be trained in the Air Force, you know, as an Air Force member. And then the work started expanding, because obviously when Brigadier Botma came back, he was tasked, he was at HQ in the flight test, flight test or something, test flying was like that. And his task was to establish the flight test capability. The work expanded, and on the 10th of August 75, TFDC was formed as a unit at the Southern Readiness Platform at Air Force Base Waterkloof. And the work, you know, the work just increased. I think, and then at one time they also had a hangar from 12 Squadron, until in 1987 they moved to Bredasdorp to be co-located next to UTB, you know, so as a because as I said, we used the range quite extensively. In 76, 3 students were sent to Epner. They were Commandant Bob Masson, a fixed-wing test pilot. Colonel Arie Meelman, he was a flight test engineer, so the first flight test engineer ever in the Air Force. And then Brigadier Grobbelaar, he was a flight test instrumentation engineer. Of course, they, as I said, went to Epner, but these guys, I really take my hat off for them, because the course is very difficult. It's tough. It's a lot of work, but they had to do it all in French. And Bob Masson told me the instructors would only speak French to them. He said they thought they couldn't speak English. He said on the night of their graduation, they came to them and spoke perfectly English. so I take my hat off to them. It's really, and you know, I've got the thesis, Colonel Meelman's thesis. I've still got it to this day. And at that time, before computers, you had to write it by hand, and he's got a very, very neat handwriting. So I take my hat off to them. The next course was, I think, around about 1980, and that was Trevor Ralston. He was a rotary wing test pilot. In that same time frame, Colonel Duncan Cook joined TFDC. Now, after he finished school, he went to study, I think it was biology at the University of Cape Town, Colonel Cook. And then he went to England, and when he was there, he joined the Royal Air Force. And then he also did the flight test course at ETPS in Boscombe Down, and he was a instructor also at ETPS. And then he decided to return to South Africa, so he joined the TFDC. Now, at that time, sanctions were in full blow. Sanctions were implemented, so we couldn't send, the Air Force couldn't send students to the military schools because there were only military schools at that time. Then in the meantime, the early 80s, I think NTPS was established, the civilian one. And then they were prepared to come and give the course in South Africa because they didn't have the limitation and restrictions that the military schools have. So the first course presented by them was in 1985 at Atlas Aircraft Corporation. The rotary wing student was Rob Sproul. Then the fixed wing was Major General Des Parker. I think he was a major at that time. And sadly, he died last year in an accident in one of the museum aircraft with another pilot, a colonel, also retired colonel. So, like we say in Afrikaans, diepspore en toetsvlieg getrap, you know. Then the engineers from the Air Force side was Peter Chaplin, Chris Dixon, and Weybrand Lewis, and there was also an Atlas engineer, Willem van Dijk. The next course was in 1988, again at Atlas, at NTPS, and the rotary wing pilots were Steve Calinetti, Andy Crawford, and Anton Delen. The rotary wing pilots, and the fixed wing pilots were Lyle Dodds and Rick Kalpen. Now, Rick Kalpen came from the Rhodesian Air Force. And I think it was Colonel Tony Smith mentioned that when the Rhodesian came and flew the Mirages, he identified or noted a problem with a modified gun sight. So that was Rick Kalpen. From the Air Force side, there was only one flight test engineer, Hans Sauer, but there were 3 Atlas engineers. It was Henry Langwich, Gerard Jordan, and Danny Viljoen. And then in 1989, it was our course. So we were just shortly after them. Then after 90, things sort of started opening up. In the meantime, ITPS was established, another civilian school. I just want to mention, you know, I described the course earlier, you know, today, ITPS, NTPS, and I think the USAF present these courses as a master degree in flight test engineering. So if you do the course. So in any case, so after that, Blokkies went to ITPS, Blokkie Schubert, he was a fixed wing test pilot. Then there was a course with Ivan Pence, fixed wing test pilot, and Jean Rousseau was the flight test engineer, and then Yanni Scott, fixed wing test pilot. And then there was a course again in country for people by NTPS, because what the Air Force also tried to do when things open up is to send people to different schools, because, you know, it's good to get this slightly although the course basics are the same, but the different perspectives, you know, inputs from the school. But in any case, then there was a course presented in South Africa, and I think that was the last one by NTPS again. It was the engineers were Dries Grindling and Danny Wingard. Dave Stock was the fixed wing test pilot, and Pietri van Zyl, the rotary wing test pilot. And then things started opening up. You know, people went overseas. But there was, I think, one course at ETPS. James O'Connell was a rotary wing test pilot, and Barry Zyman, flight test engineer. And then all the others were, if I remember correctly, were National Test Pilot School, but they went to the US. On the pilot side, there were guys like Charles Coetzee, Cobus Meyer, Lance Wellington, Musa Mokota, Stefan Hanekom, maybe one or two others. On the engineer side, it was Lester Ingham, Jacques Leroux, Baren Besaidnout, Eben Brandt, and then maybe one or two others. So up to now, to this date, I think there's only been 18 or so, 17, 18 flight test engineers in the Air Force, and a little bit more test pilots. Now, of course, all the air crew in the Air Force had wings, but for many years, the flight test engineers did not get wings. So Colonel Meelman, just by the way, when I arrived there, Colonel Meelman he moved over to Houtek and was working on the satellite program in Grabouw. So he was instrumental in getting wings for flight test engineers. Now, the pilots had the full wings and the navigator half wing, and all the other wings had the letters in the center, you know, depicting your function, you know, like in Afrikaans and English, like FE for flight engineer and BT for boordtechnicus, you know. So he wanted to, because in Afrikaans it's vlugtoetsingenieur, VTI, and FTE is flight test engineer. So he wanted to get a wing with a big T, you know, to accentuate the test. And then heraldic told him, no, you cannot, you can only have 2 letters. I don't know what heraldic in English is, but they said you can only have 2 letters, and that's why it eventually ended up with TE for toetsingenieur and TE for test engineer. And the first course, although we were, I think, the 4th course that had flight test engineers on, we were the first to receive the wings on the wings parade at TFDC. It was, I think, in July 1990, and then subsequently the wings were there. So, of course, maybe this is a good place to stop, and then next we can carry on with actually tasks, you know, in the Air Force at TFDC.
Well, Laurus, I have to say to you, I have 2 confessions here. In the first place, I never thought that mechanical engineering can be fascinating. I have a friend in Sweden who is also a mechanical engineer, was involved in the Gripen program, and then she met her husband in Sweden. I might even ask her to come here and tell us about it, because this is fascinating to me. I mean, we used to look at maths as the most boring subject ever, but the guys who actually like maths, they have a different idea, and I've just seen it in motion now for the first time ever in my life. That's the first confession. I found this fascinating, really fascinating. And I understand, I would say, at least half of what you were talking about. But anyway, and the other confession I have is I actually know where Jan Kempdorp is. Because my mother, my late mother, grew up in Ganspan, Jan Kempdorp. And of course, my late grandmother used to live in Ganspan. And so we would drive past those depots with military ammunition and things inside them. But I must tell everybody, I think that ammunition is about to explode. There's something like 54,000 tons of unused ammunition in those depots, as well as the one in the R. I know this because George and James wrote a book about it. And so I wouldn't want to live close to those. It is like atomic bombs. Then perhaps I have a 3rd confession here. And I'm not Roman Catholic, let me tell you. Lollipop. Now I can tell to you people, I don't know if lollipop still exists or not, but that's the first place I'm going to if I'm ever back in South Africa. This was the most fantastic roadhouse in Pretoria. I really hope it still exists. If somebody knows, just let me know. Because I've had the most brilliant food there. Just a fantastic place to go to. And then I know, Laurus, you said to me you designed a washing machine, but you didn't get the lawyers involved, so you, of course, couldn't claim any money from it. I'm a lawyer, I used to be one, I had to say that. Tell me about this washing machine which you designed.
Well, of course, actually, we didn't design it because at the time, I forgot to mention, when I was at the office, the engineering office, there was a task for us to design a dishwasher for the Air Force gym. And nobody wanted to touch this because, you know, this is like low class, you know, Eurorangse burger, you know, because this is not aerospace, you know. And I just want to say, many days I think back and I think I should have taken that task. I could have been a rich man today. So, of course, I just wanted to mention something else. A friend of mine always say, you know, about aerospace engineering. He said, to work in aerospace, it's not a requirement to be crazy, but it sure helps a lot, you know.
Well, now, but I have to wonder now. It seems to me that the Air Force, I always knew it was a technical service. I believe the Navy is the same. I never realized it was this technical. I'm really impressed as I sit here. But now I must ask you, how legal was it for you people to manufacture those parts in the machine shops and so? Because I know there's all sorts of contracts and things going on in the background when you buy an aircraft.
Well, of course, at that time, you know, because of the sanctions, you know, we did not have what we call the OEM, Original Equipment Manufacturer Support. There was some inform so for the parts that were manufactured, it's not purely manufacturing. There's a whole engineering behind that. You know, the parts, the drawings would be created. Then the necessary analysis, like a stress analysis, would be conducted to ensure that the thickness are correct. You know, that even from some of them, from a teak point of view, you don't have sharp corners and things like that. So there's a whole process behind that. Then those drawings are released. the part is built, and the initial part is also subjected to some form of testing, and depends on the part and what the function is before it is actually installed on the aircraft. And depending on the type and the part, then you would do some ground test. You know, if it's something that affects the function of the aircraft, you would first do the ground testing. And when I discuss in the next lecture, in the next session, you know, with the flight testing, all the build-up that you have, and then eventually you would do flight testing. Now, that's sort of the full scope of what you did. But for a part or even a system or whatever, you know, some of the elements might be necessary, some not. You also have what we call qualification testing, and depending on the parts, you can do environmental testing. You can do, you know, loads testing, fatigue testing on the part itself. So it depends on the part to what extent you would do, but the typical steps is you would design the part firstly with a drawing, then you'll do the analysis, you know, as I said, then you would do some qualification testing, then you would do ground testing with the part on the aircraft, and then you would do the flight testing. So those are the steps, and obviously each of them can be extensive. You know, if you take something like just a flight control actuator, you know, these actuators that moves the surface, and I'll get more into that later, but you know, you do environmental testing. There's a document called DO-160. There's like 26 aspects you have to test, you know, like temperature, altitude, vibration, impact loading, sand and dust. Then you get your electronic part, you know, power effects, lighting indirect, induced susceptibility, icing. So, and then also functions, you know, because for an actuator, you have to test things like the maximum load, or what we call the store load. You have to test the maximum rate at which it's operated at the associated load. It must have stiffness, because one thing I'll discuss in the next lecture is about flutter. So the actuator must have stiffness to prevent flutter, dynamic and static. So there's a lot of these aspects that you have to cover before you even get to flight testing, you know. But again, you know, you've got this full scope, and it depends on a part. You might not do everything, you know, because it's on a case by case. You know, if it's purely metal, you know, that just a structural part, you would do the analysis and some load testing, for example. You know, if you've got systems, that's more complex, because you've got functions also, especially if you get into software controlled systems, you know, that's another ball game.
In your experience, how big is the problem with fake parts in the air industry?
Yeah, maybe the best people to ask is the frontline user, but in the Air Force, it's not just a case of, you know, getting parts. There was a whole qualification, but I have heard about in the outside, you know, the Air Force, that some people do use fake part, although I think also in the civil environment in South Africa, I would imagine it's the same as elsewhere in the world. You know, the operators are also have to be careful not to use fake part. There might be some people that gets under the table, but definitely in the Air Force, it was very controlled. It was very methodical before it was a part or any system was used on the aircraft.
We had somebody here before you, Jacques de Trois, my wife calls him, Jacques de Trois. And in one of his talks, he said that they discovered a US Navy submarine close to Arneston, almost certainly trying to intercept what was happening at Overberg. Now, I know there were other submarines there as well. So now I have to ask you, did you ever feel that, you know, some beautiful woman spy is going to approach you while you're working there at test flights and, you know, get the secrets out of you?
Now, of course, firstly, I think if she hears my accent speaking English, you know, truly and really and utterly, that will put her off. But in any case, I had no interest. I'm very happily married, and really happily married. But I never at the case. Yeah. Sorry, I just want to mention something. Speaking about Jacques, on our pre-study phase on the course, one lunchtime we came up to the class. So we had the classes in the building overlooking the runways, and as we got up, we just saw this dust and smoke. And then what happened was Bob Masson, and the flight test engineer, Eddie Boatwright, did some other test on the Impala. And when they took off, I think they caught fire or something, so they had to eject. Bob ejected, but Eddie didn't get out. He got killed in the accident. And then the aircraft just over the highway to Pretoria, there was an open field. It landed there, and part of the debris landed in the driveway of the first houses. But in any case, Jacques mentioned in his talk about the G-suit that they wanted to charge him to, that he stole, and it was the flight test engineer. So this must have been Eddie Boatwright's G-suit that was hanging there.
Then I have the last question for you, and I ask it to every single air crew I get on this show. While you're next to the aircraft or inside the aircraft as a flight engineer, test flight engineer, are you wearing your Ray-Bans?
No, I didn't wear Ray-Bans because you in any case got a visor, you know, so if the sun is bothering you, you wear the visor. And in any case, I've got a big head, so the glasses never fit comfortably on my head, so I didn't use it too much. Yeah.
That's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah.
Well, Internet, we've come to the end of this episode. I'm astonished. Didn't really believe I would understand, but I do understand now. And then I'm really impressed with the Air Force. I want to say to everybody, if you served somewhere, come and talk to me. Bring your story. Don't let it die with you. There's a lot of people who's going to watch and is going to be sympathetic to you. Good news is we're carrying on with Laurus. He'll be here next week. And then he'll tell us about, I believe, a practical phase of all of this and what happened further. And I'm looking forward to that, and I'm sure you are too. And if you have any questions, just leave it here below or contact me. And until we meet again, God bless.